Good morning, dear students. Welcome to our contact session. My name is Etona Ngifikwa and I will be your tutor for research project phase 2. What is expected from you when it comes to your research project? Remember, by now you should be done and completed with your research project phase 1, which is your research proposal. At this moment, you are expected now to carry out your research, to go out in the field, to conduct your research, and then write up your research report. And that is what we call your research project report phase 2. You need to love books. I always tell my students, read and read. This is the story of my life. I'm always reading, I'm always writing. Anything you read about, take note and write about it. Read different research books. Your research report writing is presented in several chapters. For example, we have chapter 1, which is introduction. We have chapter 2, which is addressing the literature review. Chapter 3, methodology. Chapter 4, results. Chapter 5, discussion of findings, and chapter 6, conclusion and the recommendations. And also there's a section that we call appendix as well as references. We are going together to look at these different chapters and what is expected from you when you are writing your research report. Very important, do not forget your title page, which indicates your personal information, which is your name, the student number, your course or subject code, very important, and then the topic. That is the title of your project. And then very important also, following your title page, you should be able to have the table of contents. This is something that you should do when you finish writing your research proposal, but it appears at the top just after your title, but you have to do it, you have to generate it with your computer using Microsoft Word program, and you should do it at the end once all the topics, all the titles are already in your Microsoft Word and you have written down your report. Also, the abstract is something that we should also do at the end. You know, once you carry out your research and you have written your report, you have to summarize now your project, the report. Give a summary of the whole report. It outlines what? The purpose, research method, findings, main conclusions, and recommendations. Mainly should be written in past tense because you have written in, it must be written last. It's something that you have done already, and it should consist of maximum 250 words. You have to do it last. Once you have written down your report, you have to now summarize. Let's start with chapter 1, introduction. What does it outlines? You have to outline the context, the background, and the purpose. Why your study? Why is it important? Why should you do it? You should define terms and set limits of the research. What are the limitations? The reader audience can easily identify what, how, why questions. You know, readers are always having those questions. What is it? What are you writing about? Why this study? How can I go about it? Mainly uses past tense and can be written later, although presented first. You know, it's your first chapter. But if you have a challenge, you can always write it later on, immediately after reviewing the literature. Chapter 1, there are some important questions that you should think about. It should be presented in a concise, you should present a concise background of the study in chapter 1. And some of the questions that you need to ask yourself, what will their results mean to practitioners in the natural settings of their workplace? Like for instance, the teachers. Most of the time we do our research, we want to interview teachers. What will their result mean to these teachers in their natural settings? The natural settings at the school environment where they are operating from? Will the results influence programs, methods, or forms of intervention? Like, for example, if you are writing about absenteeism in schools, what form of interventions can be put in place? If you are writing about learners' performance, maybe failures, they are failing grade 10, what are the methods or interventions? Some forms of interventions that can be put in place. You have to talk about those ones in your chapter 1. How might the result contribute to the solution of social, economic, or other types of problems? How will those results contribute to such? Will the results influence policy decisions? In what way do individuals or groups benefit from your study? Yes, very important. How will those teachers benefit from that study? How will, or in what way will the learners benefit from that study? Or the schools in that region or in that section, in that sector? In what way, what will be improved or changed as a result of the project? You have to write about that. It must come out because it's very important. State the research problem, which is often referred to as the purpose of a study. You should provide the context and set the stage for your research question in such a way as to show its necessity and importance. Present the rationale of your proposed study and clearly indicate why was it worth doing. Rationale is the significance of your study. Briefly describe the major issues and sub-problems addressed by your research. What are the issues? You should identify the key independent and dependent variables of your experiment. For example, if you are conducting what we call quantitative research, alternatively, specify the phenomenon of your study. When it comes to quantitative research, state your hypothesis or theory, if any, for exploratory or phenomenological research. You may not have any hypothesis. Please do not confuse a hypothesis with a statistical null hypothesis. You need to differentiate those, especially when you are carrying out your quantitative research study, and read about this in the research books. They are clearly defined. I'm not going to explain, give definitions of this concept. They are clearly explained in the research books. Set the delimitation or boundaries of your research in order to provide what? A clear focus. Your study is going to focus on what? You will include who in your study, which grades or which learners from which grades, and the teachers, or are you including the whole school, or which ones are you excluding? Provide definitions of key concept. You need to provide definitions of terms in your research study. This is all of these are part of your chapter 1. Moving on to chapter 2, literature review. The literature review serves several important functions. Very important, theoretical or conceptual framework that underpins the study. You need to make sure that you highlight that one. You have to bring it out. Are you going to focus your study on, are you adapting a theory, or you are developing some concept from your study? Then it's either a theoretical framework that is underpinning your study or a conceptual framework. You have to identify the difference between the two. And also, you should ensure that you are not reinventing the wheel. You should give credit to those who have laid the groundwork for your project. Very important. And demonstrates your knowledge of a research problem. You should demonstrate your understanding of a theoretical and research issues related to your research question. Shows your ability to critically evaluate relevant literature information. Remember, when you are reviewing literature, you have to show what? That you are able to critically do what? Evaluate relevant literature information, and should also indicate your ability to integrate and synthesize the existing literature. You should provide new theoretical insight or develop a new model as the conceptual framework for your project. If you are now opting for conceptual framework, remember with regard to conceptual framework, you have to develop what we call concepts that are deriving from your study. That is the conceptual framework, and you should have a little drawing of those and the linkage, how you connect the concept, what does it mean to your study. You should convince your reader that your research will make a significant and substantial contribution to the literature. Example, resolving an important theoretical issue or filling a major gap in the literature. As we continue with chapter 2, to help frame your literature review, consider the 5 C's of writing a literature review. Number 1, cite. To keep the primary focus on the literature pertinent to your research problem, you have to cite. You have to cite the sources, reference. Compare the various arguments, theories, methodologies, and findings expressed in the literature. You see, these are the 5 C's that will guide you as you are reading through other authors' work. Contrast the various arguments, themes, methodologies, approaches, and controversies. You have to be able to contrast that, Either you say, although Simon presented this specific individual did not agree with Simon's conclusion. You have to critique as well. Critique the literature. Which arguments are more persuasive and why? Which approaches, findings, methodologies seem most reliable, valid, and or appropriate, and why? The why question should always be there. You should also learn to connect the literature to your own area of research and investigation. You have to connect the findings. How are they related to your research? Common problems in literature review. Very important, take note of this, because these are some of the common problems our students find themselves practicing or entertaining, and they become a norm, and in the end you have challenges. Most students' literature reviews suffer from the following problems: lacking organization and structure. Like I say, you must write your literature review in a more coherent manner. Address one specific issue, finish it, and move on to the second one. Don't write about this issue here and go repeat it to the next section or the next paragraph. Lacking focus, unity, and coherence, being repetitive and verbose. I always say, when you are using those verbs, you have to choose them wisely, not just therefore, accordingly. You have to ensure, it's not just using a verb for the sake of it being a verb. It should be connected to what you are writing. When you say in contrast, you have to know that although you presented this, but now what you are presenting is different from what you have written before. Similarly, it means you are connecting to what you presented earlier. So that is how we connect our verbs. Failing to cite influential papers. Those gurus, those experts in the field, if you don't cite them, you can go wrong with your literature review. Failing to keep up with recent developments. You need to look at what is trending, depending on what it is that you are studying. What are the trends? What is happening out there? Citing irrelevant or trivial references, things that are not relevant to your work. You are writing about, for instance, technology in education. and here comes, boom, you are talking about learners' absenteeism. Unless you know it's linked to that, but you have to make sure that you are citing relevant references. Depending too much on secondary sources. Please, we are talking about empirical studies. It's not just about secondary sources. You have to make sure you use mostly primary sources. Those studies that went out there, those researchers who perhaps interviewed the respondents, and you know it's based on empirical findings. Can be from experiments. If it's quantitative, it's not just about what has been duplicated out there. And then we move on to chapter 3, methodology. You should indicate the research method used. Is it qualitative or is it quantitative? Or is it mixed methods? If it's mixed methods, then you know one component you are mixing either qualitative with quantitative. You should cite from research books where applicable, especially when it comes to methodology. There are a lot of research books written out there. No method is perfect, so acknowledge how you collected data. Indicate the approach used. Was it a case study? If it's a case study, then is it, for example, is it a multiple case study or was it an experimental case study, depending on the method, if it's qualitative or quantitative. Read about this further in research books to get more information. Should also be able to explain instruments and the relevance during data collection. Present how data were collected and or analyzed, and also ethical considerations. Very important, ethical considerations. You need to obtain permission. You know, respondents should give you permission to interview them, for instance, or to tape record them. They need to give their consent. It's very important in research. If it's children under age, you need to obtain consent from their parents or guardians. Ethical considerations, read about it in the research books. The result of findings, you have, presentation of your findings. You are presenting them. This is chapter 4. Depending on the research method used, it present findings of a research, fact only, no interpretation. Here you just present what is it that you find out. If it's qualitative, you have to use direct quotations from respondents. What are they saying when you interview them, And if it's quantitative, you can use graphic form like tables, graphs, just to present the findings. We want the raw data with no interpretation. We don't want your voice here or your influence. You present what you found out in the field. Neutral, raw data, no interpretations, please. Very important. And then discussion. Then you bring in your interpretations here. You should present an interpretation and evaluation of the results. Analysis, when you're analyzing your results, you should be drawn together different aspects of the findings. You have to draw them together. And findings of other studies, and refer to literature. So now, remember in chapter 4, you presented your what? Your raw data. Now you come to discussing them. When you are discussing your data, the discussion now, you have to explain based on the literature. What are other researchers saying about it? How do you understand it? You have to explain it. What does it mean? When you are saying teachers are using ICT, you have to interpret the findings. If a teacher said, I make use of a computer to type my students' work, and I use a projector to present in my class, whenever I'm presenting a lesson, what does that mean? You have to interpret it and say, for example, teachers are using projector for their lesson to make their work more clear to the learners. It depends on how you want to interpret your findings, and also related to the literature. For example, in a study that was conducted in the United States, so and so found out that teachers are using technology to make lesson more clear to the learners. You have to relate. Very important. Cite relevant literature to support your findings. You should compare with your arguments, because you have to argue it. Yes, your argument. What are you saying? What is different from what you know? Reader should be able to hear your voice whenever you are writing your research report, your project report. And then we have a section that we call conclusion. When it comes to conclusion, you should give what we call a brief statement of what was found. What is it that you found out? Why the study should be done? You have to conclude. You should also provide a specific purpose of the study and the research questions it attempts to answer. That's how you conclude. What is it? What are the purpose? What was the purpose? Why that study? What are the questions that you needed to answer? The decision to why the research design and method used were chosen over other options. You have to explain your decision for choosing those methods. Why did you make use of qualitative research, for example? You have to explain it. The potential implications emerging from your study of the research problem. And you should make sense of how your study fits within the broader context about the research problem. Where do you place your study? Very important. And then recommendation and future research. How will the result of the study be implemented, and what innovations that come about? What are you proposing? What are the innovations? You have to be creative, you understand? What suggestions for subsequent research that arise from the potential outcomes of the study? Future research can look into, for example, you have to give a very good example there, depending on your research in the area of your study. Depending on the research problem, suggest suitable changes or solutions. You have to make suggestions. You have to make recommendations for practice and future research. Just some few examples. The one for practice, you can say teachers must be encouraged to develop lesson plans that reflect the motive of ICT use and integration. Remember, I previously gave an example of ICT use and integration. So if you are carrying out, this can be a very good recommendation. Remember, recommendations are derived from your study. This is just for the purpose of giving you an example. It does not say go and write this recommendation in your report. It depends on what it is that you are doing. Then we have research, the recommendation for future research. For example, in this study, it was a study that I conducted in 2013 on teachers' use of ICT in education, in the commerce region. And one of the future research, I recommended that research is needed in other educational regions to complete the review of ICT use in Namibian schools, because this research was then conducted in the commerce region. So it was then recommended that research is needed in other educational regions to complete the review of ICT use in Namibian schools. Appendix, we say it includes attachments of additional information, for example, surveys, questionnaires, glossaries, all those additional information that are relevant to your study. You have to attach them as appendix and list them as appendix 1. These are the appendices. Like you can have appendix 1, appendix 2, or A, B. It depends on the format that you would like to use, but you have to label them as such so that you can include them in the table of content. Permission letters should also be attached there as appendix. You need to acquire permission to carry out your research. Instruments used, like for example, interview schedule or observation guides, questionnaire. You have to attach it, the instrument that you utilize to carry out your research, your project. It is part of the appendix. And then references, I provided some example of APA referencing style, especially for the reference list. Your references, you have to present all references used, and they should be presented in APA reference style. For example, Simon, comma, W dot, the initial dot E dot, bracket, you close the bracket, and then it's 2014. And then those comma and full stop are very important. They are key when it comes to references. The title was Teachers' Use of ICT in the Teaching of Life Science in the Commerce Region. You can search it up on the internet and read. It can give you a guide on how the study was carried. It was a master's thesis that is, it's unpublished master's thesis, University of Namibia. You can find it at the University of Namibia's library, and then you can read it up. Why are we calling it unpublished? Is because this specific is a whole thesis report. When it's published is when you find it in some journal. Like if Simon then publish a research, a journal article, then it will not be referenced in that way. It can be referenced as, if that article was published maybe in 2018, it will be Simon, then the initial 2018 and the title. But this time around, then you will provide what we call the journal, the name of that journal, and then you have to underline it. Very important. Then this is an example of a textbook. This is a very good textbook, especially for the students who are doing qualitative research. You can read about Yin. Yin is one of the experts, the gurus in that field of case study research. Yin, this was the one that he published in 2009. Case study research, design and methods. You see, the title and all the title in when it comes to a textbook, and in actual it was supposed to be italicized because it's a textbook. So 4th edition, United States of America, that is where it was, and then published, and the publisher was Sage INC. So that is how you reference a textbook. It's just an example, but read the APA manual for referencing style. These are some of the links that you can visit just to get more information, especially when it comes to research project. The information is out there. You have to read about it. Looking at briefly some of the requirements, you will receive a tutorial letter, and it will clearly state how you should present those, how you should write your report. When it comes to your report, you have to structure it as presented to you. Like for example, I say follow instruction. If it says not more than 45 pages long, remember it's a report now, which means you have now conducted your research, you've carried out your research, and now you are presenting your findings. You have to write what it is that you find out. By this time now, you should be done with your data analysis after data collection, and there are various instructions what you need to follow. Like specifically, if you look at, for example, if you go back to introduction, you have to state the background of a study, problem, statement of a problem, meaning you should state the problem, questions or objectives of a study, rationale or significance of a study, delimitation of a study, and definitions of terms. When it comes to statement of a problem, I always tell students, please state your problem in 3 mini sections. Like for example, give a background of the problem. What is it? What are the people saying regarding that problem? Now, then state the problem. What is the problem? Like for example, teachers are not using ICT. Remember, that is a claim and it's a problem. You have to state it. And then what is your study going to do about that problem? You have to present solutions. Okay. And then in literature review, what can I highlight here? you must you have to use to your it should be relevant to your topic and must be logical and clearly presented. And you should cite at least 12 separate cited materials, maybe 4 to 6 journal articles, and also other information that you can make use of, as long as you know you are making use of peer-reviewed articles. And also you need to understand some of the tips. You can read about it in your tutorial later. It's clearly explained there. Just to look at when it comes to your project, it's very important to plan. Planning is most important. You need to identify the purpose, the aim of your research, your questions. You have to plan. What is it that you want to do? And the background. What are the background information? You need to find out more information depending on the topic that you are interested in the area of your interest. And then collecting and organizing information. There are two main sources of information depending on the research task. Like for example, reading. Reading, we are talking about theory and other research. You have to read through. Look into the books. Look into the previous research that has been conducted by previous researchers. Research, you need to look at experiments, data collection, questionnaire, survey. You need to organize and collate the information in a logical order and make sure you record the bibliography information of your reading as you go along. So the reference, you have to record it, but you use APA. Now with planning, before writing the report, prepare a detailed plan in outline form, your research plan. If I ask you to submit your research plan, I would like to see, to understand what is it that you are going to do during this period of time. How are you going to do it? Like logical organization. Information on the report must be organized logically. Communicate the main ideas followed by supporting details and examples, and start with the more important or significant information and move on to the least important information. Also considering headings. Remember those headings under each chapter. And then you must also then write your report. Very important. Always draft your draft. You should come up with a draft of your report, and you should detail a plan of that. And do not worry too much about the final form or language, but rather on presenting the ideas coherently and logically. Because later on then you can now do your review and you do language checks and all those. But first, have something written. Put something in writing. Read, draft, and edit. Check that the sections contain the required information, and use suitable headings. We have suitable headings, and they are also presented in your tutorial later. If you are talking about headings under chapter 1, like introduction, those background statement of the problem, write them as they are. You need to follow instructions. Also under methodology or literature review, you can also have headings. And you should check ideas that it flow in a logical order and remove any unnecessary information. Write in an academic style and tone. You have to use academic writing, should acquire those skills of academic writing. Use a formal objective style. Generally avoid personal pronouns. However, some reports based on your own field experience. Also, work placement can be reflective first person use. For example, I stick to the researcher. Don't say I carried out this, I did this, I did. You can just stick to the researcher carried out the research, or the researcher used observation guide as an instrument, or the researcher interviewed key respondents. Is just an example. Instead of saying I interviewed, I acquired permission, the researcher requested for permission to carry out this study. That is what we are talking about here. Very important. And last but not least, my contact details. As indicated, my name is Etuna Nyifikwa, your tutor, and I can be contacted at the following email address: etunanyifikwa@gmail.com, and my mobile number is 085 28 66 812. And please do contact me between 8:30 and 4:30 in the afternoon. So 8:30 in the morning is from 8:30 to 4:30 in the afternoon. Most importantly, drop me an email. I always respond fast to my email. Don't hesitate. Even if it's your research questions that you have, guidance, send me your draft via my email address, and I will surely read through and give you specific comments. Remember, I always tell students, do not submit hard copies unless requested to do so, especially with the first draft, second draft, and unless I say, okay, your draft is fine now, go ahead and print, then you can submit a hard copy. The reason is that we have to review your report, and you know, we have different students, we have many students, and to avoid so as to attend to as many students as possible, it's best to use the technology. You know, we are in the world of technology. You use your Microsoft Word to do the review, and we can send you specific comments. I can also you know, I use track changes. It's very good, and I want students also to acquaint yourself with Microsoft Word, especially when it comes to track changes, because sometimes you need to, I'll call a student, please just accept the changes. Many times in your report there are specific things that I can change, or a specific comment that I can provide for you, but if you are not reading and you don't familiarize yourself with track changes, you might miss out on very important suggestions or assistance, especially when it comes to language editing. But please do read through, do proofreading of your work. Give someone to read through your work. Don't just expect your tutor to do proofreading for you. Very important. And having said that, I thank you for your attention, and all the best with 2019. And I'm looking forward to read your research project report. Thank you.